Доброго дня, колеги. Вітаємо вас у Українському медіа-центрі «Реформ». В серпень місяць, який заповідалося, став місяцем досить активної дискусії щодо податкової реформи. І в рамках цієї обговорень над реформою один з елементів інформування стало інформування щодо того, що входить в обсяг податкової реформи. Одна з нещодавніх презентацій Міністерства.
One of the recent presentations of the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine on what ideas are suggested, and in a few days we will have several events on discussion of tax reform. We decided to look at in the detail at the documents which are on the website of Ukraine, and Olena Makeieva will explain to us what these ideas are about and what it will mean for our future work on tax reform. Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. Good afternoon, experts, journalists, and all those who are who are taking care of that. I would like to thank you for this activity, because for us the feedback that we receive from different channels of communication is very important for us, because we understand that what the society will perceive well, and what will be supported. It is also important for us to understand which things should not be in the tax code. First of all, I would like to say that the presentation which is on the website of the Ministry of Finance is not the tax reform, is not the presentation of the tax reform. Our objective was to talk to professional community on what are the topics for discussion. Instead, besides the tax rates, during the month we are saying about the tax rates, whether they should be 20%, 25, 10, but we forget that the tax reform is not just tax rates. In most cases, the businessmen complain that there are many things, and we forget to discuss some other things. And I'm happy that a very active discussion is going on now. And I would like to share our ideas and provide answers to any of your questions. So the questions on the personal income tax is still very important, because there were comments that you forgot about that. No, we have already identified which are the priorities. That is significant reduction of the burden on the wage fund. This is not discussed. We need just to decide which will be the model, which will be the rate. But the more important issues we will discuss in this presentation. We're discussing in this presentation. We expected to have discussion and to have criticism. We did it to get a feedback, to understand what business thinks about different innovations. I received many phone calls, and in this presentation there are many positive things. I understand that people very often look at some critical things which are to be discussed, and they don't pay attention to positive things which are in the presentation. What should be changed in the tax code? If we do not talk about these things, then we will not achieve the game of simplifying our tax rules, and that is how this presentation is being updated all the time. We are in this stage of discussion. We are working on the norms of tax code. We are working on tax reform, but not just on the rates. And each idea which is suggested by the society, we receive many letters with the ideas. We have many open platforms, and there are issues which we have never discussed, but they cannot be forgotten. And the decision is to be made correctly so that it sets so that it's just, and we test every idea whether this is the simplification of administering the taxes, whether this will mean transparency, do we all understand correctly and in the same way the rules of the tax code. Is there any risk that the tax bodies will differently interpret this or that norm of taxation, and whether this norm is fair for all the taxpayers? And that is how we test every idea, whether it simplifies, whether it's a transparent rule, and whether that's fair for everyone. Maybe I should start from some more critical things. I believe that we received most remarks on the necessity of on the appealing against the decisions of the tax bodies, whether that's the idea for discussion. How should the recommendations be given? And there were many different ideas which did not had nothing to do with tax rates. This presentation is not the presentation of tax reform. That is what I paid attention to, but different experts were talking about that. The issue of deponing money, we understand there's the business that pays taxes, but during the inspections, some wrong decisions are passed and they go to the courts. And for years, people spend a lot of money for paying for different legal services to prove that the company has correctly reflected this or that tax. But there are cases when the company intentionally go to courts to delay the process of appealing, and then the companies go bankrupt and the state doesn't get anything because the owners of the business, they are responsible in the volume of what they invested into the business. So what is the philosophy of the norm? If the fiscal service goes and does inspection and they calculated that 100,000 hryvnias are to be paid, for the payer to start the procedure of appeal, he has to put into deponent a certain amount of money as a guarantee. If he loses loses the case, then some sum of money will stay with the tax authorities. And this is done to avoid the bankruptcy when the state doesn't get anything. And the idea, which is in European norms, is a disputable one. I understand that the taxpayers do not believe into the state fiscal service, but it would be wrong if we did not discuss this issue. It was important for us to understand what the reaction could be. I looked in the social networks on what could be the reaction as to this proposal, and I saw that there were many people who stated that that is how that this is the European norm. But I understand that our taxpayers do not like it, and we listen to them, and we will not suggest this or that norm which will lead to more mistrust. But this negative reaction was very important for us, because otherwise it would be very difficult for us to get the feedback from taxpayers. Unfortunately, all the meetings are over and we have to focus on how to finish the presentation of the tax reform, and we are trying to invite as many professional people as possible via different channels of communication, including via social networks, and I'm happy that we received this result and understand that this is really a result for us. So one of the ideas also was to renew the requirement, certain requirement. That is the idea that worked, and it wasn't. It was very well perceived by the business. What's the logic there? If you look at this slide, you will understand that that is the only critical idea which is there. All others addressing many problems. No one is saying that there is an idea to suggest that electronic document circulation. Now all the accountants are calling different counter agents and they're waiting for the originals, and then they verify whether that document corresponds to the original, because the main problem is that the documents are not filled in correctly, the signature is not put correctly. There are good ideas and we need to mention them. I understand that first of all people pay attention at some critical things, that is good, but we need to also to pay attention to some positive things. I'm sure that there will be people who will be criticizing this electronic document circulation. There will be people who will say that we need the paper with the stamp, with all the details. Now, as to control over the expenditures related to business activity, we consider two models, and the first one is enacting the system which we have when the tax is calculated according to the rules of accounting, and many companies do not have some separate reports. 95% do not account for that, but there was a different model, so-called Estonian model, which suggests that only distributed profit should be taxed. And many people were saying that this is the most interesting idea for Ukraine. I'm sorry to say that these experts do not say that the Estonian model, according to the Estonian model, every day the expenditures not connected to business activity is to be reported. Every accountant in the company every quarter has to account for expenditures which are not related to business activities, which are not confirmed by the originals and representative expenditures. That's spending a lot of time, and that's the zone of risk during the tax inspection. So the Estonian model is the way from which we refused last year. We refused from getting this separate accounting, and now we want to come back to it. And it was important for us to understand whether this will be perceived well. And thank you. I understand that the Estonian model will not be perceived by you. It sounds beautifully, during the presentation as if the taxpayers will not pay taxes, but only when they get dividends they pay taxes. But we need to tell the truth. We need to say that that's returned to separate accounting, and we come to the conclusion that this Estonian model will not be perceived by the most professionals and by the citizens. But we had to understand it, because during the discussions of the Estonian model, all these details were not discussed, and that is why we started discussing it separately to find out whether our accountants are ready to account for expenditures which are not related to business activity. I have a small remark and a question. Andriy Zhurzi, MP. First, on the control over the expenditures, I believe it would be better if you define the model of the distributed profit. Then now, I believe this is just out of the context, and in the model you suggest to have a separate accounting, and that is why there's negative reaction. But there's nothing about the Estonian model. But it's not about the system which will be used today. It would be better to show Estonian model and then get the reaction to it. My question is on the physical income tax. We don't have it in our presentation here. Okay. We don't have it in the presentation, but I'm ready to answer. There are several drafts which are published on the website of the pension fund. There's your statement on not taxing the minimum salary, and that is not related to one of the concepts about introducing the single tax, the single rate. Thank you for paying attention to that. That any model is to be assessed as advantages and problems. We were looking at whether this model is fair, whether this or that model takes into account what business wants, and I believe that after the model is presented, we will download these materials. Before I answer your question, I would like to answer, I believe we will not come back to that, but I would like to draw your attention to the fact that besides this proposal on making paper documents, on making the free originals, first originals in paper form, we want also to discuss the unification of the rules, and it's on defining the bad debt. And I can tell you, if we take the banking system, for example, in the accounting standards have certain rules for forming reserves. There are instructions of the National Bank of Ukraine which require to accrue more reserves for the bank, and that means that the object of taxation will be smaller. And this proposal of fiscal service, absolutely different. The banks had to fulfill the requirements of the National Bank and also of the State Fiscal Service. And we suggest that these rules are to be unified with the accounting rules to resolve all these issues. We do not say that today we have an issue of reorganizing business. It's when the companies merge, the assets are to be transferred from one company to another. but losses of the company, accumulated tax credit are not transferred because that's not in the legislation. And we are saying that we need to also transfer the overpayments of tax which exist. We do not say that in our legislation we do not have a direct norm. We can these are the expectations which we discussed with the business, and I would like us to draw attention not just to some critical discussions, but to positive things. You understand that every idea, the positive could be positive for someone, but there will be people who will criticize, and we need to say what we like, what we are ready to accept. And now back to the question of Andriy Jourgy as to the single social contribution. We had two models which we discussed and which became mostly popular. First of all, to unite the tax and liquidate the social contribution. And the second model is to have the physical income tax and also the single physical contribution. We analyzed both models. We looked at what the experts are saying. And now we are at the final stage when we need to make a decision. Both models have both the advantages and drawbacks today. For example, one lady called me and she said, you know, it is so important for citizens to understand how much money they will get. And according to the World Bank, the richest people in Ukraine pay smallest taxes in the world. That's not fair. Why don't you introduce additional taxes for rich? My answer was, yes, really. The IMF used to say that maybe you should think about how to tax the income of rich people. But that idea was not perceived. I'm talking about additional 25% rate. Now, when we think about whether we need to unite it or leave it a single contribution, there's an idea to liquidate the pension fund like it was in Georgia. I write all the articles and all the comments to the articles. This way, yes, I believe we will be able to liquidate the pension fund, but don't forget that in Georgia they have 3.5 million population, that in Ukraine 43 million, and someone should take responsibility who will be paying pensions. When we are saying that we need to unite two taxes together, people are saying that every employee is to increase salary for each employer to use the lower rate, and many directors of the companies disagree with this idea because they don't have money to increase salaries. And secondly, if the company does not increase the salary, then we will have two models left, the existing one and the new one. And this way we will not have transparency in administering this tax. And we assess these risks. On the other hand, we need to state that uniting this tax will mean simplification, but we can achieve this if we use the model which exists. We are talking only about reducing the tax burden and simplification of registering the taxes, and we need to achieve this objective without forgetting that there should be the simplification of the procedure. So both models have the right to live. They have their own positive things. They have their own drawbacks, which we know about and which we discuss. And in the end of August, there will be a final decision presented by the Minister of Finance. As a moderator, I would like to emphasize that this question and answer says that the taxes are the priority, and all the elements of tax reform are to be taken into account, taking into account the presentations which are on the website of the Ministry of Finance. And I understand, may I add, I did not mention that the model which is suggests to unite the social, the physical person's tax and this our salary, which is 650, the salary which is 650 hryvnia has now zero rate of taxation. That is very sensitive issue for people. What is tax reform for an average citizen of Ukraine? That is increase of social support and refusal from social benefit may lead to the situation that people will receive less money. They will depend on whether the employer raises the salary for them to guarantee that people will receive certain amount of money. And we need to, we'll also calculate that maybe it could be even made bigger, more than one minimum salary, and we'll look at how this will affect the pocket of the citizen of Ukraine. Will this system be attractive? To complete the discussion on physical profit tax, I have many questions. First of all, there's no discussion that it is simpler to pay one tax than two. If we have one basis, that one tax will be simpler than two taxes. When we are talking about reduction of the single social contribution, we shouldn't forget that in 2016, the rate of the single contribution should be about 28%. When we are talking about the reduction of this, we need to talk about much lower rate. We're talking about social privilege. It also has some problems. We discussed it. We discussed what Slovakia did. They don't have any social privileges, but if the person earns less than one minimum subsistence level, then the state returns to them the amount of tax which was not correctly established. In the results of the year, inspector doesn't call me, and he usually when he calls me, he says, you have here 2 additional hryvnias, you have to pay tax on that. When we're talking about canceling one single contribution and moving to PDFO, there's one compensator, brutalization, but if you believe that this instrument is too heavy, you may not use it. That's not the condition for use it. On the other hand, the concept was saying that for a transitional period of time, we need to refuse from privileges, and the person, even if reduces, cannot really survive, and the state gives the losses to the budget to a person. They do not stay in business. They are used for paying salaries. So I disagree that business says what business is paying as the single contribution, it should be included into the salary of an employee. We've been discussing it so long. I believe that for our listeners, all these details are not of that importance because many people do not understand it. I said we cannot say that for the transitional period of time we will refuse from tax privilege, then we will refuse from the citizens for which it is very useful. Also, I agree with you that two taxes is worse than one tax, and it's easier to administer one tax. I also agree that we need to think about simplification. We shouldn't forget about that. We think about that when we work on tax reform. But at the same time, there are many experts and comments, and they refer to Slovak Republic, to Poland, where certain amount of taxes is not of the profit is not taxed. We can call it the guaranteed minimum, but we understand that that's European experience when the income of people in Europe it's 10,000-15,000 euros. That's the income that is not taxed during the year. So we would like to emphasize we are not refusing from the idea of uniting these two taxes. We are considering both, and we analyze which of the models will be simplification, which will be attractive for business, because business is looking for reduced tax burden, which will be fair for all the citizens of Ukraine, for each one, for middle class, and for the poorer. Well, I believe that the discussion is very fruitful, and I would like to mention that, in fact, what we have done with the single social contribution was mostly analyzed in details. It's not some analysis, just analysis, some assumption, but these are things which were really analyzed. We would like all the citizens to understand what are the advantages and drawbacks, because that refers to everyone, even if it's reduction for by 15-10 hryvnias. I would like to add, we were saying that now the press mentioned 28 and 25. We need to be fair. Absolutely all ideas which were presented have the right to exist. There are proposals on the rate of 20, 25 or 28. But I have emphasized it many times that we understand that the expectation of a business is not 28%, but lower, and we hear and we believe that rate will be much smaller in the model which will be presented by the minister, but we are going back to the rates. For us it is important what the rate will be, but I would like us to discuss how this tax will be administered, what original documents are to be submitted. They were saying that they will refuse from the labor books, but very few wrote about that. Why didn't you support this good idea to refuse from labor books? It's not about rates. When we're talking about being fair, we need to address such an issue. When the social privilege is applied to the income of 1,710, if it is higher, then the person doesn't get the right. If you get 70 hryvnias more, well, when we are talking about the privilege, it should be introduced to any income. We will lose about 200 billion of tax base a year, and then I don't understand where we will be getting the compensation from. it is unfair that the tax privilege is applied just to that income, but we analyzed what will happen if the privilege is applied without this limitation. We are calculating a lot, but it is difficult to assess this work from some interviews, but we do a lot of serious analytical work for the first time when the tax code is analyzed like sentence by sentence. It is a very, very serious work, and I would like to say that we have the group of analysts which are following all the comments. Well, going back to presentation. Basically, the proposals mentioned, they refer, first of all, to finalizing this reform that was introduced on the 1st of January. All these proposals mean that what else is to be done, and we see that again, I would like to say that the Estonian model will not be perceived well by business. There's a chance to maybe comment briefly other slides, or maybe get some other questions. Every day I receive information and I see what are the critical remarks. So, back to administering taxes. I explained that this idea was mentioned, we are discussing it, we are analyzing whether it will survive. It's when the company decides to appeal against the act of inspection, a certain percentage is to be paid as a guarantee. That is a European norm, and for us it was interesting to get criticism or whether the society perceives it, but people do not like it, there's no trust. But I would like to draw attention to some innovations which may be included into our tax code. Administering taxes means that that's the idea. It's not the presentation of the tax reform. That is the presentation of ideas which are to be discussed, and we discuss it every day. It's reducing all the mandatory details for tax declaration. There are many complaints when the company incorrectly writes the full name of its company, and that is why the declaration was not received. Or if the original does not have such requisite where this document was made. What's the difference whether it was done in Kiev, in Lviv? And does that have does it have some very serious information? Every taxpayer has his or her own unique ID. Every taxpayer could be identified this way. Why should you put also the address or full name of the company? And we suggest let us discuss. Maybe we should simplify some requirements to tax reporting. Also, the State Fiscal Service gives individual consultations, but it's not mentioned that in case this consultation is incorrect, then the taxpayer shouldn't be paying taxes or shouldn't be paying fines, and nothing is mentioned there. And business thinks if I received individual consultation, even if it is incorrect, then in any case I will not pay tax. That's not true. So the tax code probably should say that the taxpayer will not pay fines and penalty only. And basically, it should be stated correctly. Also, we say that we need to give access to taxpayers to the situation with the accounts and the tax bodies. Usually, the taxpayer goes to inspector, receives the card which shows how much was paid, but that is not the document. But if you need to check it with the tax bodies, then the taxpayer receives a piece of a certificate on tax every year. So we want to introduce that the taxpayers should have the access to the information about the situation with paying taxes in their company. Also, we need to reduce the grounds for initiating the inspections which are out of which are not planned. Also, we know that the procedure of administrative appeal is not trusted. What is the procedure of administrative appeal? First, the taxpayer appeals to the tax inspection that was doing the inspection, but the decision has never been changed. Then there is a system of administrative appeal. How many positive decisions were passed? Very few. There's a big mistrust, and the taxpayers have to prove that they were legally involved into business activities. And so this is an idea which we can discuss today. We suggest that we should leave only one level of appeal against that decision, but that is also not enough. We understand that the trust will not appear within one day, and so I will suggest the idea that to appeal against the tax arrears for more than 1,000 hryvnia, then there should be certain collegium set up which will include the representatives of the different bodies, so that this decision is fair, and the hearing should be open. That would be the first step to restore trust to the procedure of administrative appeal, and only this way will be able to reduce the number of appeals to the court from taxpayers. And also I would like to draw your attention to the fact that in all the presentation there are very good and positive things, and we would like to hear from you what you like in this presentation. Where are the positive things? If you are not talking about that, we understand that you like it, but maybe you will give us some piece of advice, maybe you will give us some recommendation. And again, this presentation is not a tax reform. These are the ideas which we would like to discuss with you more, because we continue to discuss them every day, and the feedback is so important for us. So, all those, please support all the positive things, or write what will be bad in them. So, according to business, according to our surveys, there's more criticism on administering, on interpreting the tax code than against the rates. then maybe this presentation has only 3 critical things. Transfer pricing. This is again the idea. The small business shouldn't be supplying documents on transfer pricing. The report is very simple, but they should be taking documents for large businesses. An idea we suggest to cancel special rules for stock market goods. We shouldn't prove whether the price corresponds to the market price. We suggest that we suggest to some other ideas which will reduce the time of work for accountants. We also suggest to simplify the requirements to documents and also we're switching to electronic document circulation. We don't want to have anything bad for the business. We want to simplify it, not just to cancel the upper limit of the fines. On the VAT, there were no comments provided, but business was saying a lot during our meetings that the right for tax credit should be paid at the customs. If the goods arrive at customs and its cost is 100 euros, but the customs say that the customs value will be 150 euros, then the VAT is paid from the customs value. And so there is an idea to have the right to get this issue resolved. In agents agreements, the subject of taxation should be not the whole sum that the intermediary received for providing some intermediary service. We're also talking about when reorganizing business, when two companies are merged, then the VAT is to have right. And also cancelling special regime of VAT for agricultural companies. There was an attempt to cancel this regime in the draft, but it was unsuccessful. But we'll go back to that because our objective is to establish equal field for equal ground for all taxpayers. We cannot say which sector is the most priority for Ukraine because all the sectors are in similar, very difficult conditions during the financial crisis. And every sector requires state support. Everyone would like to have some tax privilege or some reduced rate of VAT, but we say our objective is if we want to have to have the situation fair, then we should be discussing it. This is still a discussion, an issue for discussion. So now on a special regime, we are saying about what is the discussion about. We understand that different companies treat differently that. Is there any discussion on some scenario or whether it's still in the format, whether we cancel it or not? And we understand that this is to be cancelled. It is not fair. There are priorities for some sectors and there are no priorities for others. The light industry, they requested us to provide some privileges on VAT because they want to import equipment to Ukraine to produce Ukrainian products. They would like to enjoy this benefit. But if we give benefit to one sector, we cannot refuse another sector. This will be unfair. And so we made the decision to refuse from any privileges, from any special regime, so that all the taxpayers have single tax rules, so that they are fair for everyone. So we discussed all that, and I believe now let's switch to questions answers. I can continue. The real estate tax, I was giving many answers to that question. The real estate or the tax on the cars which has the volume of the engine of 3 liters this year, the owners have to pay a lot of money as tax. We received many complaints. People come and they say 3 years ago they bought a car and they now don't have 25 hryvnias to pay. They also drew attention to the fact that this is not fair. There are much more expensive cars which do not pay this tax just because their cars have the volume of the engine less than 3 liters. And so we want to suggest a new model so that exclusively the cars of lux or premium class tax, Lamborghini, Maserati, Bentley. There should be a list of cars which are included into the lux class, and we now looking at which cars are to be included into that list. We're suggesting to do it not in the tax code, and there will be a special resolution to the tax code, but other owners should also be paying this tax, but this tax should be less than 1,000 hryvnia per year. If that 800 hryvnias, for example, all owners of cars who have the cars which are up to 5 years old, 500 hryvnias for them is not a lot of money, but for the budget that's a lot of money which could be used to build infrastructure. And we had a mini discussion. We asked the owners, and the 800 hryvnias, they say okay, we can pay it. It will be a good compensator for the expenditures to repair roads and infrastructure. But 25,000 the tax will be only for lux class cars, luxury class. As to the tax on real estate, we're not planning to change it a lot. There were ideas to refuse from privileges. There are some privileges and the meters which are not taxed. We understand that this will be perceived badly by the poorer people, and so we will not refuse from that privilege. But we understand there are owners of elite real estate. These are the apartments with more than 350 square meters and the houses with more than 500 square meters. So there are not so many of them, but if the owners of such elite buildings pay additional tax to the budget, the citizens will assess it positively, because rich have to pay more. For them, 2,000 hryvnias is not money. because it's much more expensive to operate this house, but we need to look at the privileges for commercial real estate, and one of the ideas which is being discussed is to refuse from any privileges for commercial real estate, and that will mean plus 30 billion hryvnias into the budget, but that is not true. But we are thinking about refusing from privileges. We calculate whether this will mean a lot for the budget. Do we need to remove this privilege, and whether this will be fair? On the physical income tax and the single social contribution, I answered these questions. Environmental tax, we will not change anything. On royalty, we had many discussions. The rates are to be reduced, and the decision was announced in Washington by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, and the same conditions will be included into the tax code. And one more thing that I didn't pay your attention to, draw your attention to, excise tax. We know that we cannot one day achieve European excise tax, because this way we can destroy the market. We will suggest the graph of increase of excise tax during 5, 10 or 15 years, and only in 15 years we will achieve the indicators that exist in Europe. We cannot say that alcohol or cigarettes will cost as much as in Europe. We expect that we'll achieve these results in 10, 15 years, but we will suggest a 5-year graph schedule. And we discussed these rates together with the cigarettes sector of cigarette producers and alcohol producers. I believe I answered all the critical questions. I would like to draw your attention again that in the presentation that we prepared to start the discussion not about the rates but about details, the devil is not in rates but in details. So we need to pay more attention to that. Business complains not at high rates, but that the norms of taxation are interpreted incorrectly, and that the tax bodies are to be responsible just like taxpayers. We agree with all that, and I request you to pay attention to some positive things that we suggest. And in the end, I would like to say a few more words. It is good that we have such high level of discussion. On the one hand, there are many people who joined us to discuss tax reforms, but there are many positive and negative feedback that we receive, and for us this is a signal to what is to be left in the code or what will not be perceived by the society. So I thank again all those who are providing comments. Thank you for critical remarks. Criticism is a signal of what will not work in Ukraine. Please continue to discuss it. We will analyze it. We follow it. I'm sure that when the Minister of Finance presents the tax model, we will forget about all these talks which were not pleasant, and will be happy that we have a transparent tax code that sets clear rules with the fairness between the taxpayer and representative of fiscal service, where the taxes are such that business can pay them, and so taxpayers will pay them in Ukraine but not will go abroad. We're comparing our tax code with the neighboring countries, with the countries where investors invest. Thank you for the dialogue. I will answer questions. Oh. European Business Association, we support a lot of what is in the presentation. We have not, well, I would like to thank the Ministry of Finance that you listen to business. I would like to ask you on the excise tax. We received many questions on details. What is suggested is a 5-year schedule, and also the automatic annual indexation is suggested. Will it be introduced after 5 years, or how will it be done? And thank you, Christina, for your question. This is the proposal to introduce annual indexation. We received your proposals, thank you. There are many proposals, we analyze them, and that is another discussion, issue for discussion. What can you say whether we need, what should we do if the indexation is removed or the indexation stays? Both approaches are risky. No one knows what will be the indexation in a year. What do we want? To take risk or first to increase them? What business demands? We're discussing it. If you have any remarks, please send them to us. RBK Information Agency, you mentioned that you are planning to reduce the royalty, but last week the draft law was approved at the Cabinet of Ministers. It was submitted to the Parliament, and it said about increase of royalty by 26%. It was about royalty and excise tax. We did not change anything in royalty. The rates will be reduced to 29% and 14, then 20% and 10. And for new investment projects, there will be a surplus to the profit tax. That is the draft law which is registered in the Verkhovna Rada. But maybe there will be some other comments. I don't know which draft law you are talking about. In some, I can tell you, there were many initiatives coming from the MPs. '29 and 14, like the draft law which was submitted in July says. Business Weekly. What is the mechanism of selecting the model for the law that will be approved? You mentioned in the end of August. You have little time. There are so many proposals, many models. Maybe it's like we were discussing, but then we will tell you something different. Do you have any criteria? How you will select it, and then are you considering all the risks? I would like to say that we have two models. And there is Estonian model, then also we have the models which we analyzed. We analyzed the most popular models. There are not so many of them. And then we are starting the video blog in the Ministry of Finance, and that is the analysis of positive and negative aspects of different models. Then it will be about the simplified system of taxation. All these video blogs will be downloaded by the end of the week. We explain how we work. We had many models, but the number of models that we analyze is now reduced, and in a week the minister will present the model which, according to our calculations, according to our analysis, is the most attractive in Ukraine, corresponds to investment attractiveness and other things. The principles which we believe are the most important ones. We want the tax code to be passed in September, but we believe there will be a discussion at the National Council of Reforms on taxes. We understand that there are some other models, but we're working on all that for more than a month, and we believe that the MPs will. We don't want to have the situation repeated which happened in the two questions. First on activists. I believe you saw this model of Nova Ukraina. What is your attitude to this document? And another question about reform prepared by Yuzhanina. Is it correct to have a competition between the Ministry of Finance and Parliamentary Committee? I know about the activists. I understand that the joint model of RPR and Nova Ukraina was presented at the last meeting, and we were discussing all these different models. And all these calculations were not supported by figures. This presentation, for example, has that the increase of taxation of the fixed assets, but I believe it's about cancelling privileges. They said that the budget will receive plus 30 billion hryvnias. Where they got this figure from? These are just assumptions that the activists have. Then they don't have any joint model. They're still discussing. They still have the battles going on, and it will be interesting to see what will they present tomorrow. But we are working a lot with RPR and Nova Ukraina, and we are also calculating their models, and that is their idea, the model of distributed profit, and that was not perceived well by the society. And your second question, there's no competition between the Ministry of Finance and the head of the committee. These are two professionals. I'm sure that from the synergy of their work, that we will have a positive result for the whole of the country. And as every professional, everyone has the right to have own arguments, but I'm sure that the joint model will be approved by all, by their committee of the Verkhovna Rada, by the Ministry of Finance, by the Ministry of Economy, by the public, because our model will be presented by the minister at the National Council of Reforms. We're working together with the committee of Verkhovna Rada, and it's important for us to establish very close cooperation, not to be opposing each other, but to help each other so that all the useful decisions pass quickly via the Parliament. European EBA, the question on the system of simplified taxation, will there be any changes to the system, especially when it comes to the payers of single tax? Simplified system, that's quite a delicate issue. If it were included into the presentation, that would be more criticism, but this model will be finalized. For the simplified system, I believe it will be perceived well by everyone. We have done all the calculations. We were comparing what model we have today, what will be the model tomorrow, and it corresponds. It corresponds to something. We will still have three groups of taxpayers. The first group till 300,000 annual turnover, like today, 300,000. We understand that everyone is happy with the system. For the second group, we'll unite the second and the third group. I don't know why they divided the one and two who work with the entrepreneurs, third who work with legal entities, and we will reduce the annual turnover. It will be lower than 20 million, and the third group will be for agricultural business, so that small and middle-sized companies use it. We have approved already what it should look like, not to increase significantly the tax burden on small and medium-sized business. Two brief questions, and that is it. Business has expectations as to how to make the hired personnel as business agent. We discussed that as tax agent. Maybe the idea would be correct that physical persons who receive income themselves pay taxes and declare their income, but it will be difficult for people all over Ukraine to explain how to declare, how to fill in the declaration. That's the change, which probably requires a year of very good information campaign with all the explanations. On the other hand, you know, we have some income where the company is not a tax agent, but a taxpayer is a tax agent, and such people are to submit declaration themselves and reflect their incomes, but they either do not know that, or maybe because the fines are so little, they do not pay this tax. Because this tax is so important for the budget of Ukraine, we cannot risk so that most of the taxes are not paid voluntarily, but they are paid only because the tax bodies will start inspection. We don't have the trust now between the state and the society. We need to recognize that every one of us has some skeletons in the cupboard. We first need to create trust and then introduce some norms which would be about the voluntary payment. Please explain the status of the presentation, because on the one hand we have the result of work of the platforms in a week. the model will be presented, which means that the work is at the final stage, and now there's this presentation. There's no time to finish it. How will you work? How will you process all these proposals? On the one hand, people say that you're working on something, we do not see what you're working on. We are putting this presentation to understand what are the critical issues for the society. We received some criticism on 3-4 issues. Now we discussed a lot. I believe that in the next 3-4 days we'll receive more detailed feedback. There will be 90% of positive things indicated in the presentation, that I will be happy if the discussion continues. This is not the presentation of the tax reform. These are just the issues that we would like to draw your attention to. During this week, we want to move from discussing the rates to detailed discussion about what should be changed in the tax code. We are following all the comments, all the proposals. We hear every expert, and we hope that all the everything will be taken into account in our model. I believe that was a very good explanation. Thank you. There will be discussion in September. Thank you. I would like to invite the Ministry of Finance again to discuss the reforms here. Thank you.